As Jackson said, we'll have a live event here, and we'll hopefully get a couple other people to join in, and then we'll be posting this on our YouTube channels as well. But just a fun opportunity to talk about what's going on in your world, and talk about the space and the sector. So it'd be a great opportunity to connect. And it's one of those things where, if we were going to jump on a catch-up call or we were going to do something like that, we may as well do it so that everybody else could see what's going on as well. And a cool way to provide some of that more casual conversations about what's going on in the industry in a way that the average person can understand. So thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much for an invitation, for inviting me. And before we start, I also want to say that you're doing a great job by connecting industry players around the world, US, Europe, Asia, and you're very active in this. And STM and STA, it's like really doing a great job. So thanks for participating and committing into the industry. It's a very early stage for all of us who devote into tokenization and security tokens, but everyone is like grabbing their roles, and I think you really do a great job so far. So thanks for that.
That's really nice of you to say. We definitely recognize the international value, and so while we are in the US here, we're based in Miami. That doesn't mean that this is not a global mission. And so it's our goal to try to bring everyone together and to provide that insight around the world, because we've seen so much activity happening internationally, even from a traffic perspective. When I look at security token market and STM, most of our traffic, about 75% of our total traffic, is actually international users and investors and people participating. So that covers Japan, that covers Europe, that covers a lot of different South Korea, and even Canada and other places. Australia is large and active in this space. So it really is a global phenomenon, and we can back that with back that by all of the different traffic and traction that we've been seeing. So because of that, it is really I think exciting to see that global output, because that's really, I think, the core nature of security tokens is, all right, we're building this global financial system. These are the rails that allow everybody to trust each other. So yeah, so Jackson, I think we may be waiting on potentially one more, or
yeah, I think George was out. There's George. There he is.
All right, perfect. Great. Yeah, so this is our STM community AMA. Really want to again shout out to Gene Deyev as well as George Nast, and as two leading community members. That this is a great opportunity. I think we've got a bunch of questions prepared that will hopefully act as a springboard for us to have a good conversation. I think the goal here is to keep this relatively casual. I love this stuff. I'm super passionate around the technology. Jackson is as well, and I certainly know that you two are. So I think the goal is that these questions will hopefully give us a fun springboard to jump into the rest of the conversation. So certainly feel free to jump in or add any value whenever you have any thoughts around what's going on. But I think maybe the best way to introduce is to give each one of you a moment now that we have both of you on stage. Gene, if you want to take a second, introduce yourself and your company, and for anybody that is listening that's unfamiliar.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for giving me the mic. Yeah, my name is Gene Deyev. I'm CEO of Stobox, and we're originally from Ukraine. Most of our team is originally from Ukraine. We started this journey back four and a half years ago, and it was really really interesting how it all started together, because it was an era of ICOs, and I was looking at the different. I mean, that's a brilliant sector to look at, especially at this time. So, being a serial entrepreneur, we're just looking for different opportunities and how blockchain as a technology could change different industries. And I just faced that stupid question. Everybody was running around with this legal advices in respect to this is utility security. And then everybody who was doing ICOs needed to have that legal paper saying that we're not selling securities. And at this stage, I thought, okay, there's something much more interesting with the securities than with utilities. And this is how we started with Stobox. And initially, it was we are 3 co-founders. Now I have more than 50 people, both full time and part time. And it started with just analyzing the industry. We spent by now we spend more than 60,000 hours of research of different regulations, legislations, blockchains, implementation, and having this in mind, and at the same time being kind of technology driven, we built two products. One is for issuance and management of security tokens, and now the recent one is basically the swap, which is perfectly compliant for private company securities, but that's something that which we can call a final stage of security token management, is the liquidity. So basically, we're kind of building the whole turnkey solution, if I may say, for, of course, we and our partners, but we try to kind of navigate our clients, because most of the people who come from the business side have no idea what tokenization, and they not only need the technology, but they need the business knowledge, and that's something that we're sharing, and believe to continue sharing this. So now with the products, with some traction, we have more than 40 clients around us. Some of them are already successful, like Landshare, the guys from US for tokenized real estate. So I think the market is, despite of the current crash of Bitcoin price and so on, we see the adoption of security tokens. There's more businesses coming in, and there's more questions. We have more leads. So I think industry matures, and it's great to be from the very beginning. That's my quick intro.
Amazing. Love your passion. We can hear your expertise in your voice. And I think we're going to have a fun conversation today. So with that, I want to pass it over to our second featured community member of the month. This is Atlas One, George Nast. George, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to give a background on yourself and your business, please, now's the time.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Thanks, Jackson. Pleased to meet you, Gene. Thank you to everybody. So Atlas One is a Canadian registered broker-dealer. We are focused on digital securities, so as is the topics of today. We were founded about 2.5 years ago, although we, because of the licensing process, we actually launched our business in about March of last year. We think we are the leading player in Canada in the digital security space. We have partnerships across the world, with like-minded players in the US, in Asia, in Europe. We are in the process of actually distributing securities tokens from, for example, US issuers into Canada, into Canadian investors, from Europe into Canadian investors. And we have partnerships in Asia that will hopefully see very soon the first secondary trading of tokens that we've actually issued and sold to Canadian investors. So we've got some, I would say, decent traction. I won't say that the market is necessarily shooting the lights out. I would say there's a slow take-up sort of around the world, but in Canada it's particularly challenging just because there's a lot of incumbency and a lot of lack of inertia around change. Unlike the US, we have quite a oligopolistic financial system, and that's really what I'm fighting against almost every day. But I'm pretty happy overall kind of on the course of the business, and being part of communities like this is going to be very important, because I genuinely believe that for this to succeed, although we are licensed and registered in Canada, this is at the end of the day a global business. That's what makes it really work, and that's sort of the value add and differentiation we can bring into the Canadian market to our issuers and our investors.
All right. Well, fantastic. I think that the common theme that Gene and I discussed very briefly before you joined the panel, of this being a global business opportunity, a global technology, and certainly a global financial system, I think very much applies in a lot of ways for both of you guys, as the fact that you're in different jurisdictions from the US, and that comes with its own sets of challenges, but also potentially presents its own set of opportunities, as there's potentially a lot to gain by making a more open and accessible market for not only your own local investors, but also for your own local assets. So that's exciting. So with that, I think we can jump into the questions, and one that maybe I think helps everyone get some additional context on what's going on. As I mentioned, this will be live on YouTube, so hopefully this will be longer tailed content as well, that others that want to learn more about what y'all are doing will be able to find information as well in the future. So I think the first thing is that, given the distractions around crypto and NFTs and other things, how did you end up getting into blockchain-based securities? I'd imagine that certainly, George, you probably had a more traditional securities background, but I'd be interested to hear, and we'll go 1, 2, maybe we'll start with George. What got you into the blockchain technology and tokenization space for securities, and how did that journey go for you and your team?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit, as you hinted at, the intersection of kind of traditional finance and kind of the new technology. So it really started kind of around 2017 when I sort of finally left banking after a long career. And like most ex-bankers, we were just kind of fed up with being told how to run our business by compliance departments. I kind of struck out on my own a bit, and I was an early investor and advisor to one of the original blockchain securities companies in Asia called InvestX, and worked with them. And the founder of that company, a gentleman by the name of Jules Kwan, and I sort of had a common observation is, all of this ICO and crypto boom that was happening in the 2017 timeframe was all very interesting, but it also looked pretty frothy and full of bad actors, bad players, that sort of thing. However, that technology that they're using, the blockchain, is pretty interesting. So when I was a banker, I ran the security services and custody business for a major bank, saw the grotesque inefficiencies of how securities are traded and settled, particularly on the private side. And blockchain seemed to be a technology that had a particularly terrific use case. And so while a lot of the crypto bros were kind of focused on whatever they were focused on, we really went about to work and say, how can we take traditional securities and make them relevant to investors, but gaining a lot of the efficiencies that were absent in the traditional market. And hence, InvestX, who at the time was a crowdfunding platform focused on real estate, pivoted its business towards digital securities. And then when I came back to Canada after being in Asia for 20 years, thought that this would be a great business to try to make a go of here in this country, and along the same lines. And so it was really about applying the technology that the crypto market had basically birthed and was developing, but applying it to the traditional space that really excited me.
Did I lose you, or were you finished speaking there? It was
I'm
hard
finished.
to.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
great. Perfect. No worries. No worries. I've had once or two internet dropouts. Wanted to make sure. Gene,
Yeah.
was your experience similar or different? Did you kind of work through
No,
the sector, or talk
mine is
to me?
different. Mine is different. I mean, I can call myself a serial entrepreneur, even though most of my business was in Ukraine. What amazes me the most is the business modeling around it, around the blockchain. Because if we look at the security token, let's a bit go beyond and look at the asset-backed token. And everything that we have around are assets. And that's being said, everything we had before is, unless you're public, it's a paper-based ledger, and you can't do much with a paper-based ledger, regardless if it's a securities there or there's the other, assets that's being put on paper. You can't trade them. You can't do much. And at the same time, we see how technology how internet for the past 20 years dramatically changed humanity. I mean, like people migrate. We live in new digital era, and at the same time, we have that legacy asset-securities based, ledger, which is called a paper. So of course, the substitution of that to the blockchain, regardless if it's a network A or network B, I mean, on the blockchain and giving a global access to any asset. Of course, regulations frame these assets, not to be traded or like comply with certain rules and regulations, but regardless, they're on chain. So I think that something which amazes me is the ability to put whatever asset on chain and then just code the compliance part and make sure that everything moves seamlessly. And it's a Web3 where a token is an asset, regardless if it's a security or if it's a commodity, or it could be even your hour of advisory. It also could be a hour-backed token. So, and now once you have this, you open absolutely new ways of doing business, because now you're not only entrepreneur, but you can think of different applications. Like NFT will give you a multiplication factor for certain engagement, or you can airdrop utilities for shareholders, for people who are backing you with security tokens. So all this assemblage, can create and end up in absolutely new ways of doing business. And I think today it's not about the technology, but about the business modeling, how you can enhance your traditional real estate, for example, business model to engage millennials and Zs into this. It's not just about the investments, it's how you gamify the whole story. So I think we're really in the beginning of something really cool with that mixture of blockchain, securities, and other assets put on the blockchain. Yeah, that's my story.
That makes a lot of sense. And so following up on that, how do you see this industry growing and changing over the next couple of years? Because we've seen some pretty significant development. I think that from my perspective, when we launched Security Token Market back in 2018 publicly, it was only primary offerings at the time. There was nothing secondary trading. So I remember it was a huge deal in 2019 when, at the time, Open Finance, which is now acquired by INX, as well as T0, went live with trading. And then we started to see some realty properties pop up on Uniswap and worked with the Mount Pelerin guys to get their equity. So watching all those things begin to trade was pretty fascinating, but it certainly has happened on a different timeline than what we've seen from some of the rest of tech. So how do you see the next couple of years playing out, Gene?
I don't think that couple of years will actually matter. I look at the more long term. What I believe is that obviously the adoption is inevitable, but what I think should be here is more of adoption of the B2C side, where investors are, going into Web3 and playing with securities the same way they play with the public stocks, and I'm talking about the global level. So I think the adoption is something that we're still missing. The adoption from the industry builders, I see that, and we see, exchanges coming up. We see regulations in some countries fit. In US, it's perfectly clear since 1934. Anyway, so I see there's a lot of things building around, in the industry by the players, but there's still very low activity at the moment from the regular person. And when I say regular, I spent this year I spent some time back in Dubai, and we were speaking with several real estate companies, quite mature companies, and our main idea was to take that big building, whatever it costs, hundreds millions, and then make sure that a small person with an Android phone who is saving $700, a month, would be able to invest and then trade and build on chain. And that's when this kind of projects will start to emerge, where thousands of regular people with Android phones will be able to invest into the property they see, not somewhere in the banks, not somewhere in public securities, and then here to the news, but rather be here and invest in something that you touch on everyday basis. I think that's where the industry, that's how it should evolve. I don't think that it would come as an adoption with the next few years, but it's definitely the way to look at. And I believe that maybe not 2, but 5 to 7 will be seeing this adoption on a global level. I mean, I hope so.
Interesting. So to pass it over to George, George, you've certainly done a lot of work with brokering deals, and you've got a lot of experience, I think, dealing directly with individuals. What do you think is missing for the average person to be interested in these deals? Do you think it's the actual technical access? Do you think there's some kind of psychological barrier that's maybe preventing people from being interested? Is it a difference in risk, or is it yield? Where is your perspective on the reason that the average person is not actively getting involved in these types of deals?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of small reasons, but there's probably one big one, which is I still don't think we have shown, whether it's to issuers of securities or investors or even kind of the broker dealer community, of the sort of the tangible advantage relative to doing things traditionally, right? And I've got this perspective because in order to make sure I can feed myself, I also just do traditional securities issuance, so selling funds and real estate to accredited investors, the old-fashioned way, if I put it that way, right? And for every one of those, I talk about the digital securities proposition, right? And while there's a lot of interest, at the end of the day, it's kind of show me the money, right? Will this get us more investors? Will you be able to do this cheaper? Will I be able to shortcut the time, the due diligence time between when you start and when we go live with an offering? And the honest truth is we as an industry have not proven that case yet. And I think there is, I still believe that those efficiencies and benefits are there, but we haven't shown it yet. And I think that's the big nut that needs to be cracked here. I think where we are doing securities tokens, where there is a real benefit primarily on the intermediary side, i.e. broker dealers, is when we do syndicated deals, right? So for instance, the offerings I'm bringing in from the US into Canada, we have a traditional kind of syndication or distribution arrangement with a US broker dealer that's issuing securities tokens, right? And the process is actually pretty smooth, pretty straightforward. We had a few hiccups in due diligence, which I think we can iron out. And so that I see an immediate benefit, and that reduces the frictions and therefore costs, time to market, that sort of thing. So that benefit is very clear. Benefit for the investors, though. Look at let's put aside kind of the kind of crypto community who really gets this. The kind of ordinary investor, they're not sold yet on this, right? The biggest proposition to them really are two things. One is you're going to get really exciting offerings that are going to generate great returns. Yeah, maybe, but that exists in the traditional market as well. So we haven't really provided that yet. And the second real benefit is, guess what? I think Gene made this point, is you get real ownership of the security. It's not some paper ledger transaction buried away at the bottom of a stack of paper at a securities depository through a custodian. It's like real ownership. And with that, you can trade. And I think that is working to some of the quote unquote younger investor segment who, are aware of blockchain and crypto, but, don't quite know what to make of it in the securities context. But I think that's kind of a winnable group. I think we just got to go further in really highlighting the benefits, which is it's not just you have real ownership, but you can trade it, which you can't, or do it very difficultly in traditional private securities. And so that's the other part of the market that we really got to work on to really enhance the proposition. So I think that those are the things that would genuinely accelerate the market. And that, we have a tendency to blame regulators for a lot of things, but honestly, those issues, that's the industry. The industry's got to make this more attractive. Got to have more attractive issues. Got to really show the efficiency for issuers. I.e., you go down the digital securities route, it'll be quicker, faster, cheaper than if you did it the traditional route, and for investors to really enhance that proposition.
Great feedback. I also think there is the reality that there's a learning curve for an investor to actually care about investing in some of these types of things. I think that there is the unfortunate reality that people love lottery tickets because they love the idea that they're going to get rich. And the people that are retail that are investing in cryptos are the same way. They look at Dogecoin and it's like, oh, well, if this thing goes to $1, I could make 100,000. And so one of the things that potentially is fighting against targeting retail investors for an asset like real estate is just that maybe they're not as interested in the consistent yearly returns as opposed to some of the more sexy investments that are on the market today.
Yeah, 100%. And I see that a little bit more with the traditional crypto investors rather than the kind of group of investors who, as I mentioned earlier, that are aware but still invest traditionally.
Right.
I mean, funny experience recently. I had one investor ask me what the early buy discounts were for a securities token. I'm like, dude, that's ICO speak. We don't do that. So yeah, there's some of that still lingers in the background.
Right, exactly. So I think that potentially a fair and healthy mix of a bunch of different assets will potentially quench the thirst from the average investor. I think what you said makes a lot of sense too, that we had this conversation recently. Herwig and I were in Detroit meeting with a bunch of different firms there. And I think that one of the difficult parts about blockchain as a technology is because it's gotten so much mainstream coverage, people are expecting it to tangibly affect their experience in an immediate way that they can see and feel and interact with from day one. Whereas what I think the reality is more likely, blockchain allows you to automate and manage record keeping, which is something that's not fun to talk about. It's not something that most people interact with or deal with on a daily basis. And it's almost a death by 1,000 cuts strategy where, any individual benefit that potentially blockchains provide in cap table management, in settlement and clearing of securities, in increasing the global accessibility, in reducing the fees of compliance, in reducing the time that the diligence process takes. Any of those things that you've mentioned, George and Gene, as well as some of the other fun things we talk about all the time, it seems like sometimes those benefits don't represent a large enough value proposition on the surface individually, but as a sum of their parts, they really do potentially present an opportunity of call it a few percent at least in this process. And when you're talking about tens of billions or trillions potentially of dollars in transactional volumes, in dollars that are moving, or not even dollars, but just currency that's moving between assets, between banks, between jurisdictions, saving a couple percent is billions of dollars that in and of itself in opportunity here. And so I think that that's one of those things that really can be realized in a network effects style of scenario where on any one deal, you may not be able to incredibly capitalize on these things. However, being able to do this at scale certainly presents a significant competitive advantage. I think that also can be a difficult thing to necessarily convey to any one person.
And I'd go even further than that and say it's also a bit of an out of sight, out of mind, kind of issue for at least uniform investors. I mean, do most investors really care, if they're using their Robinhood app, how the custody and settlement and process works, right? The answer is they don't. However, last year when suddenly they couldn't buy GameStop because, Robinhood couldn't fulfill its collateral requirements with its clearing bank, they suddenly knew it better, very well, that it has its pitfalls. If that was all on blockchain, less likely that would have happened.
And let me also add, I absolutely agree with, but at the same time, there are two perspectives at which we look at what we call a security token. There's a pure investment side where there's a brokerage involved, traditional finance, and then we think about how what would be the motivations, i.e., reducing costs and efficiency to move from to shift that system to on the blockchain. And that's one industry. But at the same time, there's another industry, and what I call it's a business model. It's a game of business modeling. Like for example, there's a case where it's a real estate case where an issuer offers 44 villas in Tulum tokenized, but when you invest, you would be granted a special NFT, which only then you would be allowed to be a part of the community. So it's becoming not about the investment, not about the return on investment, but about are you inside this group? And who else has bought it? Who else has invested? Who else has that NFT? Because it's an access to a certain community, and being outside of that pool, or being inside this pool will give me some additional benefits besides the traditional earnings that traditional finance would give. So I think that we should look at this from these two perspectives. One is the shift of traditional markets, and the second is the engagement based on the new business models for people that live their lives. And I think what we're gonna see on the second path would be much more variative in a sense. Because the first is it's boring. It's like, okay, we're safe on compliance, we're safe on efficiency, we're safe on, now it's all being done on chain. But who benefits? Again, accredited investors. But what amazed me the most is the variativity of different modeling that you can now build with your traditional real estate. And instead of providing just return on investments, you can, you can do far much more with this. So I think, we should look at this from these two different angles.
100% agree with you, Gene. In fact, I've got one client, so longer term in the pipeline, where we're going to do exactly that. It's a real estate development, and what we're going to do is we're going to actually, along with the investment, sell NFTs to land plots. And so in addition to investing in the underlying investment and earning a return on that, you'll have a right to buy a chunk of land. And trust me when I tell you, it's a resort, so it's beautiful, nice views, all that sort of thing. So it's something that's actually additionally attractive to the investor. Now, you could, we in Canada, this does happen to a certain extent, but the avenues of opportunity are opened up so much broader when you NFT it, blockchain it, make it tradable, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the kind of use cases that can really enhance the attractiveness of this as an asset class.
Absolutely.
Did you have anything else you wanted to say there, Gene? Feel free.
No. I absolutely agree with this. I think that's the point where everybody should look at this from those two different angles. There's an investment side and there's an engagement side. And I see more chemistry on the engagement side.
Interesting. So the next question I had was, I think, to kind of piggyback off a lot of the conversations that we've been having already around the type of investment asset and the type of investor, and I think that they probably go hand in hand, that are most likely to be adopted using this technology. And so we've talked about how, some of my theses around the fact that a lot of the benefits of blockchain are realized on a network effects on scale. But we've talked quite a bit about, empowering and enabling retail, or just the average person, to be able to participate in this market. So I think that I want to go back and forth. Maybe we'll start with Gene on this one. Who is the most important type of investor and asset that we need to bring to market? Should we really be focusing as an industry on bringing enterprise level assets, institutional assets, if you will, similar to the KKR fund shares that we see, or SocGen did a tokenized issuance of a corporate debt offering? Are those the type of assets that potentially will attract family offices that don't have access to some of these funds and maybe are more likely to deploy? Or do you see the angle being that we should be targeting and finding out what the average retail investor wants to invest in that doesn't have access to it, thinking something like a fractionalized share of a real estate property, or maybe an early stage business that they believe in or want to see yields for? Certainly the answer probably is both. But if you had to target one in in that 5 to 7 year timeline period that you mentioned, Gene, earlier, in 5 to 7 years, when we in your eyes, the industry will be more adopted in a significant way, I would imagine, in that timeline, which investor class do you see more likely to have adopted the technology from an investment perspective?
Yeah, thanks for the question. For me, I think it's retail investors, global. And not only the retail investors, but the customers. We're talking about the private businesses, franchises, where people spending their everyday money, like looking at, for example, Starbucks. So, people spending fortunes, within their life cycle with different businesses. And the engagement with these businesses, where you would be given, for example, I've seen that business models like 3 years ago in Asia, where a company opens a candy shop, and you buy candies, and you being given loyalty points, and at some point you can convert into the shares, and now you're becoming a co-owner of that candy shop, and then they create a voting, and then they ask you, where would you like to have your second shop open? And then you point your location, and everybody votes, and then you have your ice cream, somewhere close to your, kids' school. So this type of engagement, where you as a consumer become you're reaching certain engagement levels, and then you become a token holder. Let's call it not yet a shareholder, but a token holder. So even though you have an opportunity cost of choosing another business, you will be more likely to stick, to consume from what you have coins in your whatever phone. And then at some point you would moving from a token holder to a shareholder with a certain level of course, compliance and, thoughtfulness. But at the same time, you earned it. You never bought it. You earned it probably from the very beginning, being committed to the business. So what I see is that, and that's something that would obviously bring millions of people into, through the engagement, through the chain, to participate in businesses around the world. So I believe it will be global shift and global phenomena in this case, where people will be moving from a traditional customers to shareholders through the blockchain. Call it asset-backed security tokens, regardless. But that's where I see the most adoption would come from. At the same time, we understand that there's a traditional finance moving on chain, and that's perfect. But I don't think these people interfere anyhow with that type of professional finance, which is more focused on accredited investors and institutions and so on. So answering your questions, I believe it would be the power for the main street.
You make a very compelling argument. George, do you agree? Do you feel differently? What are your thoughts?
Well, you talked about, Kyle, earlier about how important it is to create the network effect to really create the marketplace for our digital securities. And the thing about network effects, while you could talk about this investor is important or that investor is important, unfortunately the answer does have to be a bit of an all of the above, right? You do need participation, across the spectrum. Now there will always be, kind of your first adopters, those perhaps in the crypto community who, who are familiar and two, may have some winnings from their crypto gains that they want to diversify, and if we provide an easy transfer mechanism for them, could enter this market in a much easier way. But like all markets, you kind of need all sides. I see, as a comparison, a lot of the venture markets here in Canada have just exclusively retail participation, and the problem with that is you get long periods of complete illiquidity if the market is just not going the right way. And so institutions are there. People think that institutions bring volatility. That is true, but they also bring stability, right? Because there's contrarian strategies and that sort of thing. So I think the approach is, we do have to pick away at all segments. The institutional side is also very diverse. You have on one end of the spectrum very conservative investors, generally the other people's money, as I call them, institutions, where there's fiduciary responsibility, trustees, in some cases they're pension plans with strict mandates, and that could take a very long time for them to change and get on. On the other side, there are hedge funds with very open mandates. I mean, I was just at a conference that we're saying that we're saying that as much as 5% of sort of hedge fund strategies are now allocated to the digital asset space more broadly. And so that's a pretty meaningful allocation that you're starting to see. And then there's also kind of own money investors, as I call them, which is primarily family offices and the like. And there's a keen interest, and with less of the bureaucracy that you would face. So those are the ones that we are really focused on in getting involved, in this market. While at the same time, we pick away at the traditional retail / accredited investor segment, because, they're the ones that are winnable more on a one-on-one basis if we get the propositions that I talked about earlier right. So, I'm not going to say that there's one segment that's more important than the other. To really genuinely make this market and mainstream, the participation, and you do need sort of participation across the board.
Right. Yeah, it's really going to take everyone. I think that, it's unlikely that retail's get involved without more liquid markets, for example. So that almost certainly will involve market makers, which are certainly in securities. If anybody doesn't know, market making in the securities industry is certainly much different than in crypto. You can't just be a market maker for an asset without licenses, at least here in the United States. I'm sure it's different internationally, but that's going to require them to participate.
It's the same, Kyle.
Right.
It's generally the same, I guess, everywhere. Yeah.
I have to cover my bases in case I say something wrong. Certainly nothing that we've discussed here is financial or legal advice, but because of that, because you're going to likely need market makers to get some liquidity, then you're likely going to need more institutional players to be participating, which means that even in the event that we get more retail participation, it's still going to be empowered by those institutions, and vice versa. To Gene's point, we see how, things can happen in markets where retail seems to drive it. You look at crypto in a nutshell. It's basically that retail came first and then institutions participated and provided some additional stability. And that whole thing is continuing to play out over the years. But even in public markets, we see the same thing with a lot of these meme stocks being driven specifically by retail rallies as opposed to institutions, even if they get in eventually. So I do think it's going to be an interesting marriage between the two, which I think is a fun way to transition into the next topic. And maybe we can start with George on this one. What is the power of building a community, and how has that been relevant for your business and your entrepreneurial endeavors?
So I'm tempted to say that it's super important and it's great, but there's a little bit where I'm going to start complaining about regulation a bit. You got to be careful with communities because there is a lot of restrictions around what can be said in groups like this. You almost caught yourself a little bit earlier on, Kyle. Right, well done. I have to do that all the time, and the problem is if the community is so bland, you're not allowed to talk about so many because you're not allowed to give investment advice over forums like this, particularly around specific offerings. Whereas, as you know, in the unregulated crypto space, there's like message boards and Telegram groups galore with all sorts of buy this, sell that, this is going to moon, kind of language. You just cannot do that in the security space, right? So I think community building is in the security space is going to be a little more traditional, right? Which is around give useful information about that there are offerings without providing investment advice, and not indulge in sort of the banter and hype and memes and moons that you see kind of in the traditional crypto space. And if you can get that right, then I think it's a very powerful mechanism. And we're partnering up right now with another Canadian company that is a real expert in crowdfunding for real estate, and they use this very effectively. They create communities, kind of in the retail space, but they also make sure they don't cross the line too much, and in terms of the banter and the securities rules. And I think that's the right balance to sort of reach in kind of the community setting.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. We've certainly learned that very well with conducting our regulated crowdfund, that the types of things that you communicate are very, very specific, and you need to be intentional with every word. And so it does provide, somewhat of a difficulty in really being
what? No moons or memes for STM, Kyle?
We certainly have plenty of games, don't get it twisted, but they're very specific and hopefully intentional. We do our best. But I also think with you, I mean, as a broker, right, you build your own investor community as well. It doesn't always have to be retail or media traffic. I'm sure that you have plenty of investor update that you kind of stoke your network with regards to maintaining that community as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the one part that the earlier comment was more around investors. I mean, there is an important community around us, the industry, right? So other broker dealers, potential enterprise issuers, that sort of thing, right? That is so crucial, right? And I think that's an area where forums like this and others, around the industry are important, because we're going to be a key part of creating this network. And we still, as I said, have a lot of work to do to build the proposition of this industry. And Atlas One, could try to do it on its own, but it will fail, right? What's important is working with like-minded people and organizations to collectively build this industry, and that's where these types of forums are important.
Totally makes sense. and flipping that one over to Gene, Stobox has done a good job of building your community. What are your thoughts around how crucial that is to driving adoption, to working with other institutional players, and really just your business model?
Yes, thank you. So, yeah, surely you're just absolutely right that you have to be careful, and community plays a great role in, in the business today. So, but we also should think if we do an offering and say we're going to leverage the power of community for the offering itself, then that's one thing. But when we build the community for our business, that's another thing. So, and I believe in community-driven businesses again. I don't think that that security tokens and or the offering itself should be, like not to correct say promoted, but your business should be promoted through the community, and of course the offering itself should be very cautiously put and worded. So yes, that's being said. It's important for the community. Is important for the business itself, but at the same time, I also we should emphasize the regulation that is going in the crypto space itself, and we believe that the whitelisting of the wallets. We already see regulation in Europe. I'm not sure how it's what is up in US at the moment, but MiFID looks at in EU. It looks at the crypto not the same way as with security tokens, but again, there's a certain level of compliance and regulations. So I think that gap would in the community behavior would somehow be eliminated within the certain or harmonized within some period in the future. So if we say that don't moon in security tokens at the same time, we see that still happening in crypto. My answer would be we won't see any moons in crypto soon as well, because we would. Because of the regulations, because of the enforcement, legal enforcement, in crypto, that kind of proactive behavior would also be, I can't say banned, but it would be a bad manner to drive the community this way. So I think that the business-driven communities would take place rather than fundraising communities. But yeah, I think it's a very important role in the business setup as is.
Well, speaking on behalf of Security Token Market, we thank you both for being active members in this community, and we take a lot of pride in cross collaboration, right? This idea that we can all share in the success of others. A rising tide will lift all ships, and that this industry is too big for any one player to really, I think, capitalize on any of this stuff. So we're really focused here at STM in staying as that kind of global source to be able to amplify all of the huge wins that are going on in the industry. I certainly can say that, George, you have, I haven't stopped thinking about you mentioning that you have a really exciting client hopefully coming to market soon. I don't want to put you on the spot or ask you anything you're not comfortable about, but we certainly would love to work with you and make sure that we get the word out on that. And same with you, Gene. As you guys have exciting developments, please keep my team in the loop, because we're always looking for amazing issuers and really upstanding companies like both of yours, to make sure that we can continue to promote and drive you as much success and traffic as we can. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Oh,
thank you for your kind words. We definitely will. Thank you for that, and you'll hear about our cases very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Kyle.
Cool. Well, with that, it's 1:56. Jackson, maybe I can tag you back in if you had anything else left to share, and then other than that, we'll give a chance for Jane and George to share where we can find out more from them. But I'm going to pass it over to Jackson if you're there.
Yeah, of course I'm here, Kyle. Thank you guys so much for joining us. This has been incredible. Both your guys' insights are just so meaningful, and the perspectives you guys bring are just so valuable to all of our communities at large. So, like I said, this will be on our YouTube shortly after. And now is typically where we go into a brief community question portion. We actually have a couple questions. So, Jonah is actually interested in what types of assets and opportunities are there on both of your platforms for interested parties to invest or research. So, if Gene, you'd like to start and talk about STO Box on DS dashboard and DS Swap, the types of investments available, that would be great. And yeah, followed by George.
Yeah, thank you. To start with, we're a technology provider. So we are not a licensed financial crowdfunding or whatever investment platform. So what we do is that we provide a SaaS for our clients. And in this case, we have our leading product, which is called DS Dashboard. And that's already like 21st, 24th version of it. Like we're updating it every 2 months. And what we do, we white label this for the issuer themselves. So it's an addition to their business where they manage their corporate securities on their behalf. So we provide them with the tool and with understanding and kind of consulting, if I may say, on a technical advisory how that thing works, and then they work for they operate the system themselves on the using limits and using the whitelisting and all the features that securities of private companies have. So that's everything being used within the platform, and we have around 10 clients that have already issued their platforms. It's a white label. The most advanced, it would be one of our clients from the real estate. Again, you can find it on our website, Stobox.io. There's a list of clients, and again, this is we have few from real estate, we have few from natural resources, there are a couple of small medium enterprises. Usually, it's private businesses that fundraise for the equity, and some of them are successful, some of them are not. But we don't deal on the advisory or financial advisory side, so it's only the technology that comes from Stobox.
Well, that makes perfect sense, Gene, and I hope that helped give a little bit of insight into the listings available through STO Box, and that it's actually a white label platform for their issuers. And so I'd really love to hear a little bit now from you, George, about the investment opportunities available through Atlas One right now.
Sure. Well, we've got 15 offerings up right now, so I'm not going to go through.
I think we might have lost you there, George.
Is it a connection problem?
Yeah, I think we might have lost George there. So, and we'll give it a moment to see if George's connection comes back in. But until we get George back, how about we move to the next question? This is coming from Ross, and I believe this is for you, Gene. He's asking about how the NTT soulbound tokens can be connected to the securities. And he has a follow-up question that he'd also like me to ask, but I think that we should start with the soulbound tokens and how they can be connected to securities.
Nice question. Okay, so what we do is that we put a hashed identity on as a soulbound onto an address of investor. In this case, of course, it's not the KYC itself, so it's not a photo of a person, but it's rather a hash of where this document is being initiated and verified by a regulated let's say identity operator, like for example There's plenty of those. And the main idea is to basically whitelist the address itself. And then instead of having a centralized party to do the compliance, it's all the contracts that do the compliance by reading the information on your entity, and that entity metadata will tell me more about you as an investor. If you're public, if you're accredited, what are your limits, and so on. And that metadata, it's on the IPFS, and whoever adopts that technology will be able to not manually whitelist the KYC data themselves, but you just get one entity, and then you move around Stobox environment or our partners' environment seamlessly, and making sure the compliance is perfectly in place. But at the same time, you never pass KYC second time. With the third parties, your passport are not stored in some whatever databases around the world, and regulations are in place, and the compliance in place. So we're working on this technology, and by the end of this year, we'll have this implemented for our first customer.
Well, that is incredibly fascinating, Gene, and it seems like it's going to be a great, great tool for the security token industry. Thank you for sharing all that with us. And then the last I believe we just got a couple more questions, but the second question from Ross is, what is the future of gamification in tokenized assets? And I think that this might be something that we all could speak on. Potentially, George, if you're back and have any insights, we can always circle back to the investment opportunities available too. But yeah, Gene, I'd love to start with you and talk about the gamification of tokenized assets.
That's a very broad topic. It's not even a topic. It's like
it definitely is a broad one.
It's the universe. It's the future of our.
Do you see tokenized assets more helping as a tool to develop these games and really help as a fundraising tool for some of these developers to access capital? Or do you more see the gamification of tokenized assets coming to fruition through like play to earn models or different game structures like that?
I think it comes from all of the sides. I mean, the adoption comes, and again, as you say, from the investments into the gaming, because we see the enormous rise in interest for the blockchain games and the gaming itself. Because again, once you look at the industry of investment and you look at the typology of people, I strongly believe that an investor is not only the person who is satisfied with returns on investment, but it's rather a gamer, an engager, a person who engages himself with the business. And the business can be only virtual. It doesn't have to be, brick and mortar. It may be a mixture. So, and again, that's something that I've already mentioned about. It's the business model that would imply that you become a customer through the gamification, or look at the metaverse rush. Everybody's rushing to the metaverse, but what's the basic implications? How are you gonna do? So you're gonna see a grocery store. You're gonna buy your food's not physically outside, but in metaverse. But okay, if that's the case, isn't it a gamification of certain areas of your life? Probably it is. So I think it's the mixture and the assemblage between all of the different ways of how people interact. And again, I think it's not only the security tokens, it's the asset-backed tokens or loyalty points and NFTs and so on that are mixed together. And gaming, I think that's just the fuel for that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Gene. I really do see both of them kind of working in tandem. These developers can almost raise their funds through security tokens, and then once their game is fully developed, they can use the blockchain to issue different tokens, coins, utility tokens as a digital currency type thing within their game. And I think that is like where we're seeing a ton of demand for blockchain games right now. So I really do think that they can work in tandem. And so I believe we lost George, sadly, but we do have one more question for you, Gene, and this is coming
Unfortunately, I'm
from.
going to have to step in, Jackson, before you ask that. I also need to leave. I have a 2 o'clock and I stayed over for a couple extra minutes, but I am going to leave. So, Gene, thank you so much for coming on here. And we really,
Thank
really
you.
appreciate everything that you do for with your team and for the industry as a whole. So, thanks again, Jackson.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kyle. Thank
Have a
you.
good one, Kyle. Thank you for joining us. And so, Gene, the last question I have for you is coming from Cream Curtis in the crowd, and they are curious if you are going to be building out or adding support for Polymesh. They're currently working on building on Polymesh now, and they'd love to use Stobox's product for their Polymesh product.
That's a good question. We didn't consider this, being frank. I know the Polymesh from the very beginning, and I know that from the very beginning, it's back to 2017. When we look at the Poly as one of the industry leaders, and I haven't checked. Frankly speaking, I haven't checked the updates of what the guys built so far. We didn't have it in plans, but there's another obstacle to that at the moment, because we're trying not only to build the technology, out of the box, but we try to solve our clients' problems. And when we provide tokenization, it's very important that we are responsible, because the market is very low at the moment and it's very immature at this stage. Dependency on the different providers, that's something that could play a very bad role for the client and for whoever project manages the whole tokenization part. So probably this is why we trying to provide turnkey solutions, even though we're not. I mean, from the consulting point, we're pretty much up to date. Definitely, we're not legal guys, but we've spent a fortune on legal fees and so on. So basically, we can frame an offering in a way that customer just needs to get a verification from his local lawyers. So we don't want our customers to pay their lawyers to be educated on tokenization. It's not our job. So we try to eliminate third parties from that, simple pipeline from, of the client delivery from the first conversation to the secondary market. And why it's important? Because at this stage of the development, we have to be responsible. We have to be kind of one window for the client. But as we scale and as the industry scale, obviously, I think that inter-adoption and being able to, depends on already mature partners in a good way, and provide this mesh for the business. I think that would be definitely a key to cooperation and future development. So again, today we are more of a sailor approach, where we have to get the traction ready, get the traction done, make sure there's no pitfalls for our clients. And then once the paperwork, once the routine and all the processes are set, and it would be a scale stage, for the whole industry, not just for us itself, then the dependency on third-party providers would be crucial.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, Gene, and I think that's a great plan that you guys have, and we're really excited to see how you guys grow and how this industry grows. And Cream Curtis, I think that answered your question pretty well. unless Gene, would you like to share which blockchains are currently supported on the Stobox TS dashboard?
EVM, because we build the logic for it. I mean,
Yeah, no,
any.
I just wanted to have it restated for Curtis.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, man. And honestly, this has just been really incredible having you and George on. George was sadly not able to get his audio working again. He sent he sent a text message to us. He said that you can find him at Atlas One Offerings, and it's available at atlas1.ca, and you can sign up for investment at invest.atlas1.ca. And this is going to be our last question for you. This is coming from Brick VC. He's curious if you've been working with DigiShares in their re-tokenized real estate.
No, we haven't. I know I've met Klaus several times personally around the different events, but
it's all good. It's there's so many different projects in the industry, and we love to help cross-pollinate as much as we can. And so wanted to get that answer for Brick VC. Brick VC was actually
another thing I want to mention. Sorry, before we end.
No, of course.
Today it's not about. I mean, when people asking me like, how you face competition? I say, guys, there's no competition in this market. It's only collaboration, because we're all building like from the different angles, from the different resources, and from the different backgrounds. But we're building like the whole new era of how security tokens or asset-backed tokens would evolve and be managed around around our big environment. So I don't see any competition but the cooperation at the moment. So we're very open to any partnership, cooperations, or any talks from companies that engage themselves in security tokens, different levels.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and I have that same mindset. We're all working to build this decentralized future of finance, and we're really excited about it. I was actually just going to mention Brick BC was in our first cohort of featured community members, and Brick BC is a loved community member in the STM community. So if you guys if you guys are free, we are going to move into our token trivia section now. It's going to be themed based on the 2 articles from this week on George and Gene. And if any of the people in the crowd can be any of our STM team members, we will ship you out an STM swag pack. So I'm going to wrap up this stage, and I'll meet you over in the token trivia text channel. I'll also join the voice channel in case you have any questions. But yeah, really, thank you so much, Gene, for coming. And yeah, you could just share where everyone can find you. That would be great.
Yeah, please. You can find me on stobox.io, and there's plenty of links, plenty of materials. There's a lot of. We're running one of the biggest blogs in the industry, if not the biggest. And yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, anywhere. Gene Deyev, please. I'll be happy.
Beautiful. Thank you, Gene, and thank you to everyone in the crowd who tuned in. Have a great one.
Have a great one. Thank you. Bye.